Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. This hour, the picture of marriage is changing in the U.S. People are waiting longer to get married, marriage rates are down, and so is the divorce rate. Marriage is changing in the U.S., so what do you think of that? The phone lines are open. The number is 313-577-1019. But first, some recent reports suggest young people are in a dating recession. In the last few years, there has been much discussion surrounding the direction romance is heading. Marriage rate is lower than it was at the turn of the century. Technology has shaped the way dating is measured, and people are embracing new forms of the practice. Jessica Moorman is an associate professor of communication at Wayne State University. She is here to discuss the state of dating today, how complicated it can be today, and whether coupling should even be a goal. Professor Moorman, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, Tia. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Exciting. So, a number of factors that characterize the dating scene. It's chronically happening online. There's more agency, but more ambiguity. How would you define modern dating today?
Fascinating question. So I would say that, first of all, we have to think about kind of what dating actually is. I defy you to find two people that have the same definition of what it means to be dating in the current era. And historically, that has meant spending time with someone casually, potentially escalating that to include more romantic or physical attachments, depending on what you're interested in. But we had a kind of clear set of expectations, right, in terms of gender role norms, in terms of who was to do what when. We would think of this as scripts. So these sets of imperatives, directives, or kind of culturally guidelines for how we are to approach courtship, intimacy, and partnership. A lot of those scripts were informed by gender norms and practices. So think about the idea that men are to pursue, women are to be receptive, right? And this kind of norms has been pretty much agreed upon throughout the kind of early part of the 2000s, and then we kind of shift away from them. That can be a good thing if you find that you are not a person that adheres to those guidelines or expectations, but that has created some complications in terms of how people are approaching one another. Who is to ask? Who is to receive? Are we splitting the bill? Are we not? And so the set of scripts that we follow regarding dating are kind of falling apart for good and for bad.
When did you see that shift happening in terms of the scripts that we used to follow?
So there's not a set point, right? So if we think about dating as a function of single status, contemporary single status is the product of a series of rights movements, political changes, policy initiatives going back to the 70s. So you could technically argue that women's liberation movements, right, kind of helped to undo these scripts. But I think what is kind of more so fueling this question in the current era is economic factors. So, for example, men do not out-earn women in the same way that they used to if we're thinking about heterosexual courtship norms and partnership. So the idea that, for example, a man is to pay, built into that are all these other expectations around pursuit, protection, all of these other kind of gendered expectations. And again, I'm not invested in that per se. I know that that can be kind of scary language for some, but the economic landscape has shifted such that many of these roles and responsibilities, these gendered initiatives, these gendered scripts kind of fall by the waysides.
So these scripts that we are referring to right now, and you said, for better or for worse, they've changed. They're going away, they're dissolving away. What does that better for worse look like?
So for better, women are shooting their shot. So I want to give you a statistic here about the city of Detroit. So the city of Detroit has the highest rates of single status of any city in the country. Currently, 77.8%, this was as of 2024, of Detroiters are unmarried. And I'm talking about within the city proper. So side note, everyone, if you are single, shoot your shot because you don't know. The likelihood of them being unmarried is pretty high. And so I'm defining single here by divorced, widowed, or never married. So we're talking about unmarried single status. And so that high rate of single status provides us kind of more flexibility and opportunity to meet and greet in the city. And so you asked about like kind of positives that come out of that. Well, you have people approaching each other that otherwise possibly wouldn't. Women asking men out, right? And forming connections that way. Again, not everyone is rooted in a gendered kind of man-woman kind of approach to relationships. And I know that this language can be scary to some that are listening, and it's not my intent to like alienate folks. I'm just making a comment sort of on our kind of cultural trends and trajectories over the past couple of years. And in terms of kind of what some of the consequences of that are, well, we don't have a shared language for dating. So you see research, for example, that finds that women, if we're talking about heterosexual partnership, will identify a dynamic with a male partner as a dating relationship where he won't. So in the exact same relationship, two parties are seeing what they're doing as different. And again, that's not to demonize men or demonize women or create this kind of gender wars dynamic. We're certainly not looking to replicate kind of noxious discourse in this conversation. But truly, we have kind of evolved into or shifted into or arrived at different perspectives about what intimacy, connection, and the future of that looks like for any pairing of people.
And we can go on just that for an hour, just that one little snippet. But I do want to ask listeners again, what's going on with marriage right now? What do you make of it? The phone lines are open, 313-577-1019. We definitely want to hear from you all. Now, how has the cost today impacted dating? You talked a little bit about economics, and we've all seen it. The prices increase on everything because the cost of a date impacts how dating plays out.
Absolutely. I think that we've also been hearing discourses around too broke to date. The idea that maybe you're not making enough money to even be a viable dating partner,
and
right?
It's so real.
It is, because especially if you're invested in a traditional notion of courtship, right? Where, I'm a young man, I'm working hard, I'm earning money. I want to take that young lady out on a date. I want to be able to provide her with a wonderful experience of my own kind of imagining. I want to see her come alive with, these treats and expectations that I've provided for her, right? And understandable. That's a beautiful kind of dynamic to exist within. But we're seeing as salaries are kind of flattening out in relation to other kind of broader economic factors like inflation, tariffs, and things like that, the opportunity to kind of treat someone looks a bit different. And so you're seeing online discourse that's more about, well, what can we do for free? Or how can we take the burden off of this? Part of this is also that 50-50 going Dutch split. Now, people get activated about that 50-50.
Very.
They'll tell you, don't ever do it, you're whatever. I think at this point, what I come to this research with and what I come to this question with is, at the end of the day, we're talking about love, right? We're talking about hanging out and coming together, right? We're talking about spending time and intimacy and forming partnership, right? That's going to look different person to person, couple to couple. So these kind of set expectations that are attached to economics, they need to change in relation to the current conditions that we're all existing within.
You're listening to The Metro. I'm Tia Graham. We are discussing marriage and dating today, and we're taking your calls, 313-577-1019. My guest is Jessica Moorman. She is an associate professor of communication at Wayne State University. Now, Professor Moorman, online dating, specifically dating services, expands a person's dating pool, but how has the experience shaped how people interact in the dating environment? Is it any different from previous eras?
Well, I don't. What are the words that one could say here that are not going to get this station thrown off in violation of the FCC? I think in general, what you see is that the expanded pool provides benefits and consequences, right? There are pros and cons. Expanded pool, right? I can date out of my geography. I can select for people that demographically might fall out of kind of who I'm encountering day to day. I can be tailored in my approach, so looking for people with certain kinds of degrees or backgrounds, right? But we know that prior research has found that the swipe culture kind of gives us this expectation. It trains our expectations around attraction, connection, and investment. So in the same way, we're at the DIA, it's Friday, we're mingling, we're sitting and we're thinking, oh, let's go to the Kresge Court and walk and vibe. And now we're going to this jazz performance in the Diego Rivera Court and we're just going to meet and greet, right? There's a fixed set of people in that world. And so how you conduct yourselves in relation to those people is going to look different. You're not going to just walk away from a conversation from someone mid-sentence. You're not going to scan the room and talk to maybe you would, but every last person in the room, right? And so many of the norms and codes of conduct for communication that typically take place interpersonally fall away in online spaces. And we know that is in part because of the disinhibition effect. So I'm more anonymous. Obviously, we're creating and crafting these profiles, putting our best face forward, quite literally. But ultimately, that kind of generosity, that patience, that clear communication, hey, unfortunately, I don't think this is for me, but it's been nice meeting you, a way that you might end a conversation in person. And so you see like more ghosting practices, more, I'm a grammar stickler, so typos get me. But at the end of the day, there are all these kind of other metrics and cues that we're relying on. And also not seeing someone for who they are until we get them in a social setting. And so it creates access benefits, but other issues interpersonally and in terms of communication.
Because I often think about the persona we create when we have these online dating profiles, and how you're, like you said, the best version of who you are. And a lot of us are entering into these relationships, these conversations, expecting that particular person, and that's it. What do you think about that aspect of the online dating world?
Well, I will say this, is that there's no right way to date. There's no right way to meet people. And the way that is right is the way that works for you. And so if an online space is where you thrive, where you're meeting the kinds of connections you want, and from those connections having the experiences that you want, I think that's kind of more clear there, or having shared values with the people that you're encountering, right? I think that's important. But there's nothing wrong with chilling at the Diego Rivera Jazz function and circulating after that, right? And so I think we see some displacement of other forms of dating justifiably, and see an expansion of our options there. But I think folks have forgotten that there are other ways to interact. Join a sports team, join a club, go to the general strike rally on Friday, right? Like there's any number of things we can do to interact with others that are outside of the online space.
Jessica, let's go to the phone lines. We have Jess from Plymouth. Jess, thanks for calling today. What's on your mind?
Hey there. Thanks for having me on. I actually just remembered from when I was dating a few years ago. I'm married now, got married to my wife in October. But when I was dating in that period of time, it was when you were talking about going 50-50 on dates and that tendency for that to happen more often. I did that all the time when I was still dating as more a protective measure as opposed to anything else, because if I paid my share of the bill, that couldn't be held over my head later, especially when I was dating men. That was a risk. And so if I paid for my half of the bill, that couldn't be held over my head later to tolerate things that I might not normally tolerate on a date.
Jess, unfortunately, I've had the same situation happen to myself, so I definitely can relate to what you're saying, Jess. Thank you so much for calling in today. Dr. Moorman.
So Jess highlights a very important phenomenon, and there's one word that comes to mind. Do you all know, listeners, the term hypergamy? Hypergamous. Are you all familiar with this term? What it refers to is the practice of partnering for wealth, status, or access. So you may trade. We see this commonly. Obviously, Justice Queer, she talked about marrying her wife, but we see this commonly taking place between kind of younger women who are trading kind of youth and the fetishization we have around youth as a culture for the resource of an older male partner. And typically what is built into that dynamic is a power dynamic. So if I have the money, I also have the say. And we see that also extending to other roles and responsibilities within partnerships somewhat. And so it's funny, I'm writing about this right now. The idea of independence comes up a lot. This is, I'm not trying to activate anybody now. We're just talking about money and dating, okay? Don't write the station. Don't write me. But the idea of independence is women retaining some portion of resources, money, finances for themselves so that they can freely move within this kind of dynamic. You know, I don't have to ask for permission or whatever. So what I hear in Jess's account is this kind of question of the ways that money and power align within the dating relationship, and how sometimes if you're dealing with someone whose values, I won't say unethical, but their values were not aligned in that instance, right? Like for the right person, maybe that dynamic made sense, but in their instance, it didn't. And so that mismatch around values attached to money, power, and how that shows up in dating relationships is what I'm taking most from Jess's account.
Once again, Jess, thank you so much for giving us a call today. And I ask, you know, what's going on with marriage or what's going on with dating culture? If you have any questions or comments, the phone lines are open, 313-577-1019. Now, when we return, we will continue our conversation with Professor Mormon, and we'll get into the dynamics of dating and marriage today in the U.S. You all stay right there. This is The Metro. This is The Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham, and we are discussing marriage and dating today, and we're taking your calls, 313-577-1019. My guest is Jessica Mormon. She is an associate professor of communication at Wayne State University. Professor Mormon, before we get into the heart of the marriage questions we have here, how do you define singlehood?
Oh, great question. So we can think of single status as being defined in 4 ways. First deals with marital status: divorced, widowed, never married adults. Sometimes we think of separated folks in there depending on the data set, but ultimately really it's divorced, never married, and widowed adults. Then you have single status as it relates to parenting. So single mom, single dad. Householder status: is this a single home or a home owned by a couple? And then finally, dating and relationships, which is what we've been talking about in the previous segment. And so we use the term single kind of interchangeably, but the word singlehood I think of as being attached to not only just that identity, that demographic category, but the roles and responsibilities attached to being single. So for example, if you've ever, as a single adult, had to move a couch into your second floor apartment, you understand immediately what the roles and responsibilities of singlehood are and how, as an individual, navigating them can be more complicated than one would otherwise expect. And that is a story from my life, because I had to move a bathtub upstairs. So we figured it out.
And here I am thinking I had to carry the worst things up the steps. You had to carry a bathtub.
I didn't do it alone. I had to get a team together, but we made it work.
Oh my gosh. So like you said, Jessica, Professor Mormon, we've been talking about dating. And of course, one expectation baked into dating is that it could lead to marriage. And we know that America has the lowest marriage rates literally ever right now. And divorces are also going down. What's going on with marriage in America?
Great point. So you highlighted that we have the highest rates of single status, i.e. lowest rates of marriage, if we're thinking about at that marital status level, right? And low rates of divorce. So this feels paradoxical. What's actually happening is people are not entering those marriages they would otherwise leave to begin with. And so we see this showing up in a number of kind of areas of the data. One is delays in first marriage. And so in 1990, don't quote me on this directly. I'm just pulling this from my mind now. In general, during the early 90s, you saw the age at first marriage for women around 22. Now we're at about 28. Wow. And so what you're seeing is that the 20s are becoming this period of never married status where young adults, regardless of gender, are trying out new lives, moving to different cities, pursuing education, becoming more stable so that when they ultimately enter that marriage in their late 20s, their early 30s, their mid 30s, their late 30s, right, they have a more solid foundation. You know yourself a little bit differently than you would have if you entered that marriage early. You have more resources, or at least education and a career path theoretically as well. And so it just creates more stability in general, but is attached to consequences for that marital rate.
I want to go to the phone lines now. We have Kira here from Troy. What's on your mind?
Hi. So I just was listening in, and I just wanted to make a comment because I feel like me and my husband met 3 years ago, and he's from Turkey, and I'm from Michigan, and he was here on work, and we ended up, dating for 8 months, and then he ended up proposing to me, and now we've been married for 3 years. But I just wanted to make the comment that he was making six figures at the time that I met him, and I was making like about minimum wage. Now I don't work at all, but even though he was making that money, we were still able to. 80% of our dates were not at like restaurants. We were going downtown. We were painting at Belle Isle. We were going to picnics. He flew me out to Turkey a couple times, and this is while we were dating. So there wasn't any financial part that I was looking at in our relationship. I was just looking at the fact that we were dating and seeing how much we loved each other, and over time that was able to evolve into something more. So I think that even though there is stigmatism around going 50-50 and men and women not paying in the economy, I really think if we could just put to the fact that spending time with a person at the end of the day and how you feel about that person may be different than what they can financially bring to the table.
Kira, thank you so much for giving us that comment and calling in from Troy. Thank you so much. Professor Mormon, listening to Kira talk about, you talked a little bit about that, the importance of the person themselves and not everything else that they can provide for you.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And it sounds like Kira and her partner were focused on getting to know each other. Now, I'm going to push back a little bit on you, Kira. Flew out to Turkey, girl? What?
He took me out to Turkey because
Come on.
in the Turkish tradition.
Right. I'm not saying
You're
that.
actually supposed to meet the parents.
Oh,
You're supposed to meet the parents. And then when you came to Michigan, he flew out to Texas because my dad was living in Texas to ask for my hand in marriage.
Oh, yeah.
So the dynamics in an American relationship versus what you're supposed to do and the dynamics of a Turkish relationship, or they really, it's different. So I wasn't looking, I don't think I was looking for anything financial from him, even though we were dating. I think we were just focused on the fact that we were in love, and the money just happened to be there to help our relationship. But I don't think that either one of us were thinking about that at the end of the day, even though I know it's a very big aspect of the world. Oh. Yeah, he took me to Turkey for a month. He paid for everything, and then he flew me back. And then my mom was like, oh, my goodness.
Yes, I mean, great life. Does he have a brother? And you highlight something important, right, which is the role of cultural traditions. And I just want to reiterate your earlier comment. It's like, well, you didn't know that was happening while you were forming a relationship and he was courting you and you all were connecting, right? It sounds like that finances were an essential component. But, I had to have a comment on that one now.
Kira, thank you so much for giving us a call today out of Troy. And we also have Johnny on the line from Warren. Thanks for giving us a call today, Johnny. What's on your mind?
Good morning to you, Professor Mormon. This is Johnny. I'm 50 years old. I'm disabled, so that makes it hard for me to have any kind of relationship with the opposite because I can't drive. And in our community at night, it's so difficult to get around. It's kind of hard for me, And the one thing about me and my girlfriends that I've had since high school in Cass is they all still talk to me. And they're all married and have families, but I'm 50 and I'm still single, and I just can't drive due to my disabilities. And most girls would like to be picked up on a date,
Oh, Johnny, hi. It's good to chat with you.
Yes, thank you so much, Johnny, for the comment. Now, Jessica, what do you think about that?
So you're highlighting a couple of things is that, first of all, Johnny, you might want to go check an app and hop in on an app. You're a perfect candidate for something like that. But I do want to highlight something because I heard that you shared that you have a disability. Folks particularly who are on any form of aid for their disability, they're actually uniquely targeted due to our policy structure, right? So for example, if you marry and you get any kind of support from like the Office of Disability, that impacts what you are considered to be earning. So if you marry, in some instances, you can lose access to your aid.
Wow.
And so you have a situation where many people are who are drawing aid due to ability status are kind of forced to be unmarried because it threatens their ability to actually gain the resources that they need. But in Johnny's specific instance, it sounds like you've got a warm heart, and it sounds like you've got good connections with those other ladies in your life. And it seems like you just need to find another context to meet folks in, and online might be a good one for you because maybe you find somebody who loves driving and who's happy to pick you up. Y'all better find Johnny.
Johnny, thank you so much for calling out of Warren. And Professor Mormon, there are often discussions that women's dating standards are too high or that men aren't as interested in dating at all. What do you think of those claims?
Wow. You're setting me up here. Okay. So I'm going to say this. No one's standards are too high. It's that you just maybe haven't found a partner that works for you. Now, because what is the answer there? Have lower standards. Let's reduce what we are expecting in terms of our treatment.
Exactly.
And so I think when I hear those comments, I'm always wondering kind of what is the critique under that, or what is the perspective under that? Because you would never tell someone, or at least I can't fathom a scenario where someone would tell you to have lower expectations for your career or for your life, or have lower expectations for your friendship. Oh, I know that those girls bullied you and pushed you in the mud, but, just keep hanging with them.
I should still be their friends, yeah.
Right. And so this is a unique area, I think, because there are a lot of inflamed tensions here. We haven't spoken as explicitly about the gender wars and kind of this burgeoning series of conflicts, boys versus girls conflicts that I like to describe them as, because they are very juvenile.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I mentioned at the top, like at our previous segment, that, we have all these shifting roles and expectations around gender. And some of that is kind of boiling over into resentments. And so the critiques of women having too high standards, I'm not trying to paint any pictures here, but on the other side of that, what I wonder always is someone that is making that critique not able to meet the standard of the women that they choose to date, or the partners that they are pursuing, or the men that they are interested in, right? And so that's kind of one response that I would have to that. But I also understand that this is a very kind of emotionally inflaming question because, someone in the audience may have heard that as, what do you think, I'm not good enough? And no, that's not at all. It's that folks are interested in the types of relationships that they want. Now, there is the question of, are you surrounded by the people you're interested in? Are you able to access those individuals? And so maybe you do want to date a Russian billionaire girl, but he don't live here. So what you gonna do about that? Do we need to change up our criteria then? And so there also then becomes a question about kind of pragmatics. So are we balancing our desires with the reality of the world around us? Because, that also enters the question and the equation as well.
You are listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET-FM. I'm Tia Graham. We are discussing marriage and dating today, and we are still taking your phone calls, 313-577-1019. My guest is Jessica Mormon. She is an associate professor of communication at Wayne State University. Now, we've been talking, of course, a little bit about single status, singlehood, marriage, all the things. I want to get into singlehood a little bit more in depth if we can, and I would love if some folks could give us a call to help us out. But you are of the opinion that Black women in particular should detach from the expectations of relationships. We talked about those scripts as well earlier. So why?
So I'm going to just offer a gentle corrective there. I actually don't think that that is a specific question for Black women in general. I think that all of us, regardless of our race and gender, should reflect on whether the scripts that we have inherited or the expectations that we were raised to have ultimately serve us in the current reality, right? Like I was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s. What we were doing in the 90s, we were not doing now, right? And so the kind of goals for marriage and relationship look a bit different. They also change over the life course, and they change over life events, right? And so I would task everyone to just kind of dust off their expectations, take a good look at them, and think through whether what you want is actually served by what you're producing or pursuing.
Now, once again, singlehood. There are so much that goes into the expectations, especially what you're just saying. It's not particularly just Black women. It's all women. It's all people. I want to expand on it a little bit more because we're not following the scripts that have been placed for us. And especially when we talk about Black women, though, those scripts, even the ones that were true for the 80s, were never really true for Black women. So could you talk about that?
Right. So one of the things that I study in my program of research, currently working on a book about single Black women's experiences of unmarried life here in the city of Detroit, one of the things that we know is that Black women are on the vanguard in defining what contemporary singlehood is. And contemporary singlehood is a very specific period of time that I'm thinking through that is, when we have a majority of a population is unmarried, right? So we talked about at the top of this episode, the top of this segment, that we are, for the first time in our country's history, more than half of all adults are unmarried. That is a rarity. We're at 52%, right?
Wow.
When historically it's been as low as like 30%, right? And again, thinking about divorce, widow, never marriage, our rates of widowhood are considerably lower. Our rates of divorce are considerably lower. So we're really talking about never married folks here. I'm sorry, I lost the plot, y'all. So,
No.
Oh, singlehood and Black women. Right. And so demographically, as we're shifting, right? So Black women and Black adults, I should say, if we're talking about the U.S. population as a whole, reaching that benchmark of more than half of all adults being unmarried in like 2000 and 2021. Black adults reached that in the 80s. And 1980 specifically is when it was observed in that census, but probably tipped somewhere in the mid 70s, right? So you have like two generations of Black adults, because it's not just women, it's Black men as well, who have been living, forming family, partnering in a world where marriage was not central. And I know I want to calm everybody down now, because marriage is not a value judgment, right? You're not a better person if you get married. You're not unfit if you aren't. So let's kind of strip away some of these value judgments that we often attach to single status. That's another thing I focus on in my work, is single stigma and single discrimination, but I'll pin that for now. And so you see that adult Black families are first and foremost more kinship oriented. So instead of thinking about like the nuclear family unit, you have a broader system of family and support where you have maybe a mom, her mother, her children, like a 3 or 4 generation household living together, supporting one another, sharing childcare and home responsibilities. That's what we would think of as a kinship unit. Totally functional family system. It's this that we live in a society that prepares us, trains us, and expects us to enter nuclear family formations. And so the imperative for marriage looks different among Black Americans historically. And we're seeing that other groups are joining us in those rates of marriage. So in those kind of reducing rates of marriage. So every group except for Asian Americans, rates of single status have increased, rates of marriage have gone down. And so currently, and there's the expectation that by kind of 2060, you're going to see about 40% of all people below the age of, let me retract that citation.
Yes.
But anyway, we're seeing a trend of increasing single status that doesn't look like it's ebbing anytime soon.
Wow, and wow. You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham. My guest is Jessica Moorman. And when we return, we'll talk about stigma and singlehood. We'll be right back. Once again, those phone lines are open, 313-577-1019. You all stay right there. This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. My guest is Jessica Mormon. She is an associate professor of communication at Wayne State University, and we are discussing marriage and dating today. Marriage is at a historic low in America, and divorce is also going down. We're taking your calls. What do you think about dating and marriage today? The number is 313-577-1019. That's 313-577-1019. Now, before our break, we were talking about singlehood status. I do want to talk to you, of course, just about what it means in relationships, in terms of relationships. Are you saying that women should not marry, period? Or is this a philosophy that attempts to eliminate the desire to find a partner?
I am saying that all adults should be judicious about who they marry and why, and not feel obligated to enter a partnership to uphold a traditional value unless they hold those values themselves.
Do you think that we're seeing that because of the lower marriage rates and the lower divorce rates? Do you think that's why we're seeing it?
What? Single stigma?
Yes.
Yes. So I really quickly define it. So single stigma is the co-occurrence of labeling, stereotyping, separation, status loss, and discrimination that unmarried and unpartnered adults experience in mainstream society due to their single status. And so the idea that, for example, you would go to Thanksgiving dinner and everybody at your family dinner would be making fun of you because you haven't been married yet. Or we can think about this as access to resources. So the fact that you cannot get on a partner's, a sister's health insurance, but you can for a marital partner, right? So single stigma has interpersonal consequences, harassment, discrimination, but there are also a structural component as well, which is where we would think about single status and equity as coming in. So I don't know if any of you have seen recent reporting or discussions about like the cost of being single. So estimates from like the mid 2010s pinned it at a single adult spend about $1 million more over the life course than their married peers because of things like inability to access affordable health insurance, not being able to split housing costs. That was in 2013.
Wow.
And so now I would imagine that we're up to about 1.5, maybe even 2 million over the life course.
That's insane to even think about that is such a hit to your wallet. Just being single, the status of being single is such a huge hit to your wallet over a lifetime.
Right. And on top of there being like economic penalties, we talked a bit about kind of the social penalties attached to that as well. And so when you see kind of discourses around kind of Black women and marriage rates in particular, you see a lot of narratives of Black women being unlovable, undesirable. You're too independent. You're too rebellious. You don't know how to act like a woman. You're doing all of this. Part of that is to stoke anxiety, to force women to pursue marriage. And we saw in 2026, earlier this year, the Heritage Foundation published a report looking about exploring the kind of composition of the American family. And their goal is to really return Americans to marriage. And so how are they going to do that? By introducing tax penalties for folks who are over 30 that don't have kids and are unmarried, on top of the penalties we already have, creating marriage camps for people in cohabiting relationships so that they can learn to be married, and eliminating some forms of partnership like queer marriage or things that help people form families like access to IVF. Like this document came out in January. And so we see that identity of being unmarried in particular has consequences that reach far beyond simply the ways people are talked about, the opportunities for partnership that people have in front of them, but also are attached to real tangible consequences in terms of the labor market, in terms of your standing in society, when we think about unmarried status there. And so I take single status inequity and single stigma very seriously in my work, and I'm actually currently developing a project right now to better assess that idea. But much of this conversation is fueled by directives, imperatives, scripts that see marriage as an ultimate social benefit. Newsflash, much of our society is dependent upon marriage in order to function. Who do you think is going to keep these kids or care for your elder relatives if The government is not providing resources for that to be done. It takes place in the family system, oftentimes through unpaid labor of mostly women. And so that creates kind of a big incentive structure for kind of a structural imperative for marriage, that shows up in interpersonal conflicts and conversations.
Now you've been researching, been studying. How do you compare that to previous eras? What we're seeing right now with the Heritage Foundation's documents, and some of the things that we're seeing happening in terms of just a return to traditional values per se. Where are we in terms of where we were maybe in the 80s versus
Sure.
where we are today with that idea?
So rates of singlehood today are the product of social and political changes that began 50, 60 years ago, right? So for example, women having increased access over reproduction. The idea that if I got pregnant at the end of high school, I would have to get married, give birth to that baby, and my plans for my life, becoming a nurse at 25, whatever, got derailed, right? And so one of the first things that we see is increased access to birth control, increased access to abortion care as being kind of a first pillar to this. Again, I'm focusing on women here very specifically because it's these changes that afforded privileges and opportunities for all. The second pillar that we see is increased access to education, so like Title IX passage and other forms of discrimination and protection for women in the workplace and in higher education. That increased access to education, delays at first birth, that creates that period of time where, okay, now I'm dating, I'm little, I'm single, got my little pocket money, I'm living in the city, I'm 24, right? On top of that, we see increased access to economic products in the 70s. This is like the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, where you, for the first time, start seeing women being able to purchase properties,
Bank accounts,
right? I think all of us think about like, oh, my grandmother had to get married in order to get a bank account in like 19-dickety-boo. Yes, that was true for many. And so that increased access to economic control also contributed that. So when we talk about the 80s in particular, you're starting to see the emergence of contemporary singlehood for some groups. The idea that you are not required to marry in order to, for example, have access to resources, to parent children that you now didn't make to begin with, or to survive in the absence of a formal education. And so marriage moves kind of over, this is something about Stephanie Kuntz's work, this is really kind of over the modern era. But when we talk about singlehood in particular, we're talking about the 70s onward. And so when you get to today, now I'm not saying y'all ain't picky now. Don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying y'all ain't picky. But what I'm saying is that the pressures to partner, the pressures to marry, the incentives to marry have radically changed, where love, companionship, compatibility, communication, these become kind of primary drivers for partnership, as opposed to things like providing for families and children, accessing resources, which I would argue, don't you want to be with somebody that actually likes you, as opposed to then just, get a check? But again,
that's my argument.
It's complicated. It's complicated. So this is some of the kind of shifting demographic trends and norms and policy that have given us this current era.
It's the Metro. I'm Tia Graham. My guest is Jessica Moorman. She is an associate professor of communication at Wayne State University. We are discussing marriage and dating today in the U.S. And Professor Moorman, once again, we've been talking about singlehood, marriage, how they're represented. I want to expand that and talk about how they're represented in media. But before we do that, we do have to get to the phones. I didn't even see we had Cindy on the phone lines.
Okay,
Hi,
Cindy.
Cindy. What do you think about marriage and dating
Hello.
today?
Well, she's been so articulate and eloquent and backs it up with all this research. And all I can think of is being in Aldi and trying to talk this woman into splitting a bag of onions with me. Because what was I going to do with 10 pounds of onions? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Financially, right down to the little thing like grocery shopping, where it's buy one, get 10 free or something. I don't need 11 boxes of Cheerios.
Cindy, you know what? You nailed it.
Yes.
This is shout out to Arts and Scraps, because my friend Stevie Baca, who works over at Arts and Scraps, yesterday we just split a Costco membership.
Yes.
Exactly for the reason that you're highlighting, is that these bulk prices, which are attached to an affordable deal, often do not make sense for individuals. So you have to come together as a community, as a collective, if you will, to share resources and share access to things. So yes, Cindy, you nailed it. Exactly. What am I supposed to do with 6 steaks now? Am I going to eat steak for every day for next week?
Cindy, thank you so much for calling in. Professor Moorman, Cindy is echoing a couple of factors we're seeing. Marriage getting less popular, but also the financial burden of being single. We know gas prices are going up. I just paid $4.69. Inflation is still high. Are you seeing or hearing this financial consideration in recent weeks?
Absolutely. And you're also seeing singles creating informal care networks to deal with it. So one of the things I want us to understand right now is the concept of kinlessness. It's the idea that you don't have any living spouse, children, siblings, or parents.
Like no village.
Yeah, no theoretically,
village.
but that tasks you to create a village.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so what you're seeing now is that in the absence of maybe partners or siblings that are based locally, right? Because we have people moving in and out, people relocate for work. You're seeing these informal networks of community care emerging. And so, like I said, me and Stevie have a Costco membership. Hit me up if you want to go get gummy bears or whatever. But also thinking about this in terms of living arrangements. So increased rates of roommates and thinking about like Golden Girls houses in retirement years. You're thinking about these kind of pods and care networks. So creating a constituency of friends and family that, you know, you're literally sitting down and deputizing someone to be your emergency contact. You're creating roles and responsibilities within the friendship group. This is attached to kind of, in some respects, the idea of like decentering relationships and how much of what we have relied on a partner for, we can outsource to our community. Again, to kind of take the pressure off of having a single partner do everything. And so these ideas is what I'm hearing in Cindy's comment and some of her, because you begging this lady to take 5 onions off your hands. I get it, because what am I going to do with it? I'm going to take it home. It's going to spoil, and there's resources that have gone by the waysides.
I can just say this personally. Carrie knows I ask him all the time, I'm going to use your Costco membership because I don't need one personally, but I'm going to use someone's Costco membership. So, you know, thank you so much, Cindy, for that. Same thing to you, Professor Moorman. But before we get out of here, we've got about 2 minutes or so. I do want to just get a brief glimpse into your brain when we talk about the media portrayal of relationships, television, movies. They've had a profound impact on the way we view relationships. Right now, what are some positive depictions of relationships that you can think of on a TV or in movies or whatever we have right now?
So while I think of that, I'm going to offer us an idea that extends this concept of scripts that we started with.
Okay.
And so it's the idea of sexual scripts theory, which talks about the patterns that we observe in culture and how media is a critical example that is set for us, in addition to our parents' relationships, the peers that we have in our lives, the narratives and the messages we're getting from religious circles, but the idea that there are these cultural ideas that circulate. We rehearse them interpersonally, and then we internalize them into our thinking about relationships. I'm going to be honest with you. Nothing comes to mind, which is bad.
It's bad.
Now, I will say this. I am biased in my media consumption because I'm often thinking about certain portrayals of relationships. So, you know, I've been very closely following this Meg Thee Stallion, Klay Thompson situation where he's doing what he's doing and she's reacting how she's reacting and the discourse around that, right? But I would say this in general, we should all be managing our media consumption when it comes to relationship scripts and media, and being mindful of our own values and our own desires when pursuing partnership.
Jessica Moorman is an associate professor of communication at Wayne State University. I want to say thank you so much for joining us and breaking down just relationships and marriage and status for us throughout the U.S. On the Metro today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
That's The Metro for today. The Metro is hosted by Robin Vincent and me, Tia Graham. It's produced by Sam Corey, Carrie Jr. II. Our engineer is Jose Yanis, and our senior producer is David Lyons. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. And this is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. You all have a great day.